Hello and welcome to Generational Wellbeing with Dr. Lom. Thank you for joining us today. I am honored to be joined today by Dr. Nishi Gopal, who is a physician specialized in integrative psychiatry and sleep medicine. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
All right, tell our audience more about you, what you do, and why you do what you do.
Yeah, so I am an integrative psychiatrist and sleep medicine physician, as you mentioned. I'm based in the California Bay Area, in San Francisco Bay Area in California, and I have a private practice. It's called Pacific Integrative Psychiatry. And so we see patients all across the state for anxiety, depression, and sleep issues. But why I do what I do is, when I started out doing my medical training, I actually thought I was going to be a pediatrician. That's what I went to med school for. And then when I actually got into medical training, I realized that pediatrics wasn't quite for me. I really enjoyed working with adult patients, and I started off in internal medicine. But as I was doing that, I found that I was talking to people about what was going on in their lives. What were their families like? What were their relationships like? What was important to them? What gave them a sense of purpose and meaning, and all of these things. And my attendings were like, you can't talk to all of your patients about that in clinic. There's no time for that. And so then I realized I was in the wrong specialty. So I switched from internal medicine into psychiatry, which allowed me to really explore some of these types of questions with patients. And while I was doing that, I also got really interested in sleep because I saw how that was the foundation of health for a lot of our patients. So then I ended up doing subspecialty training in sleep medicine. And then after that, I got really interested, or during this whole process, I got interested in integrative and holistic medicine. So understanding how nutrition and gut health and lifestyle and meditation and mind-body practices and all of these things have an impact on well-being, and how that if you take care of yourself as an individual, it also has this ripple effect on the people around you, your spouse, your families, your communities, and so on. So that was a long way of explaining how I got into what I do now.
Well, it is amazing because I like the story because everything is connected, right? And with everything you're doing, it all fits in, which is why I'm so glad to have you here and to talk about the connection between family dynamics and mental health. Because as we know, it's mental health crisis, and we're seeing an increasing in the number of kids and adults with the diagnosis, whether it's depression, anxiety, and so many other disorders where I think recently the CDC said like 1 in 6 kids between the ages of 2 and 8 have either a diagnosis of a mental health disorder, a behavioral disorder, or a learning disability. So it is alarming, and I'm really excited to talk to you about this. So how does the family dynamic impact the mental health of the individuals in the family?
Yeah, it's such an important question for all the reasons you just listed, right? Because we are in kind of like a mental health pandemic in many ways. People are more anxious and depressed than ever, right? Yet our lives are more comfortable than ever. Like if you think about how we lived 100 years ago, we didn't have all those conveniences that we have now, but our mental health is really suffering, right? So it's something is going on here that needs to be addressed. And I think the piece that's often missing in the mental health field is that we're very focused on the individual person, and oftentimes treatment is happening in a vacuum, right? So you're just talking to the person in front of you, and I mean, there are therapists and psychiatrists who do take this into account, or physicians like yourself as well. You're working with families and kids, but oftentimes we're looking at things in this very individualistic way and forgetting that this person in front of us, we live in a system, right?
Right.
We don't live on an island. And so taking into account the family dynamics, including cultural dynamics, and this is something that me personally that I've been working on through my own, journey on through mental well-being and therapy and understanding myself and personal development, all of this stuff is understanding the impact that culturally my family has had on me, that the individual dynamics have had, both in the nuclear family with parents and siblings, but also extended family, even societal expectations, right? So all of these things are like inputs that kids are taking in. And even as adults, we're taking in and transmitting to the people around us. So I think that's why, it's so important that we start to unravel these layers so we can really see what's going on at all these different levels.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, how working with families and with individuals, are there any patterns or any things that you've seen that have recurred across generations that may be a risk for a mental health disorder?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's several areas that I like to look at. So one is, what are some learned behaviors or kind of like learned belief systems that a person grew up with in their family? So an example of this would be, the world is not safe, right?
Mhm.
Or you can't trust people. Or, oh, don't say that to anyone because they're going to judge you, right? So secret keeping. So these kinds of behaviors will have an impact on someone's mental health, right? Because they might develop anxiety because they have this belief that the world at large is not safe for them to be in. Then there's also coping skills. So we learn that from our families, right? And our parents, and we model what we see, right? That's what kids do.
Right,
So
right.
they might see that their parent engages in coping skills that could be considered unhealthy. So maybe it is related to substance use. Maybe their coping skills related to putting themselves last all the time, right? Not paying attention to their needs, not taking care of their physical bodies, not exercising, maybe binge watching TV or binge eating, or just, putting everyone else first, and becoming resentful, people pleasing patterns, those types of things. Then, of course, there's genetic factors too. So if there is a family history of mental health issues, whether it's anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, psychosis, or other things, then a child is more likely to develop those kinds of things as well. And again, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are epigenetic factors which have to do with the environment, right? So all of these things are at play. Um, and then this will impact how a person interacts with others, right? So communication styles will get passed on, those belief systems will get passed on, and then it can lead to this cycle where these are passed down through generations,
Right,
right? And
right.
that's where intergenerational trauma can come into the picture.
Right. And everything you've mentioned, very subtle, where if you don't really pay attention to it, you don't really understand why your kid may be exhibiting a specific kind of behavior, whether it's anxiety, I don't want to go to school today. Maybe someone did something or said something that doesn't feel safe, and the kid is having a hard time, or even a parent may be saying something like, the wall is not safe. Where's that coming from? From history passed down from generation to generation. So, yeah, really subtle, but it's really important us to start paying attention to kind of see where did that come from.
Yeah, I was just going to say, no, that's such a great point because it is often very subtle. And, like for example, I'm thinking about some of the patients I saw this morning in my clinic. And so I work with the adults, right? And sometimes they don't even recognize, because these things are so subtle, how their own patterns might be impacting their kids. I don't know why my kid is so anxious. I'm so worried about them. Okay, well, let's talk about your anxiety, right? Let's see,
Right.
well, how are
Right.
you navigating the world? How are you dealing with these issues? Because it really does have an impact. Or let's look at the generation before. How did you grow up as a kid? How were things handled when you were feeling like maybe you were bullied at school, or you felt like your needs weren't being met, or that you weren't allowed to speak up, or you weren't allowed to be angry? How did your parents deal with that? And what was that like for you? And how might that be showing up for you in your life now? And so really starting to cultivate and develop that awareness is a powerful first step.
Right, right. Absolutely. Awareness and then communication too, right? What are certain communication patterns you've seen, or how would you counsel a parent who is maybe has a kid who has anxiety, like we talked about, for example? Like, how do you counsel them to start communicating where they're kind of working this through?
Yeah, I think so much of it comes from modeling that behavior,
Right.
right? Like it really starts with oneself, whether you're, trying to help your child through an issue, even if you're like training a dog, like, obviously kids and pets are not the same thing, but, like the way that we communicate, the way that we model that behavior, it's really going to impact everyone around us, right? So the first thing is just to take a step back and notice, what are your own feelings about this? What might be coming up for you? So for example, if you see that your child is struggling with anxiety, how is that making you feel? Is it heightening your anxiety? Right? Are you now jumping into problem solving mode and let me put on my cape and save the day and rescue them? Right? Or are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you feeling helpless and now wanting to, maybe dive into some of those maladaptive coping mechanisms that we talked about briefly? So that's the first thing, is really checking in with yourself and then modeling that healthy coping communication style. So what that means is being open about communicating, getting curious about it, right? Not making assumptions. So even just sitting down with your kid and asking them, how are you feeling? Hey, what's going on? Maybe even teaching them vocabulary depending on their age and where they're at developmentally, using vocabulary lists or books and things that can help them understand and tune into their own emotions. But again, it really starts with oneself.
Yeah, yeah. And those feelings could sometimes be uncomfortable too, right? But it's okay to not have to fix everything for yourself or for your kids, because most parents are like, I just want to fix it. This is like, I want it to be okay. But it's okay sometimes to sit in that discomfort, in that place of really, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix it. But just sitting in it sometimes is where you find that healing, or you find the way out, so to
A-
speak.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a key point, because people are going to face problems in life, right? That is the nature of life, right?
Right.
We are inevitably going to be facing problems of all different kinds throughout our entire lifespan, from childhood right up until the end of our lives, right? Like that just doesn't stop. And so the key is learning resilience, right? And so this is the mistake that I often see people making, and it's totally understandable, right? No one wants to see their kids suffering. No one wants to see their kids sad or anxious or upset or any of that. But what we want to teach them is how to navigate those, like how to surf the waves. There's that quote from John Kabat-Zinn, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. So can
Right.
you help your child or whoever it is that you're supporting, can you help them build a surfboard? Right? So instead of trying to stop those waves, can we build the surfboard? And what does that look like? That looks like learning how to tune into your emotions, learning how to be with them. And, sometimes if your spouse is struggling or your best friend is struggling, they don't necessarily want you to come in and fix their problems. They just want you to sit with them and be present. Right. And that's what kids want as well, is that they know someone's got their back and is there to support them. But we also need to encourage them to figure it out, right? Solve the
Right.
problems. I
Right.
remember seeing someone, I just thought this poignant moment, it really stuck with me. Someone that I knew, she had two little kids, two daughters, and I think they must have been like 7 and 5 at the time. And I think they were fighting over a toy. And one of them came to her, I think the older one came to her and said, oh, my sister took my toy. And, she was upset about it. And I
Right.
remember the mom said to her, well, what do you think you should do? And so she put it back, in her hands and, okay, well, let's talk about this. Like, what's going on? What do you think you should do? What do you want to do? And I was so struck by that, because oftentimes parents will be like, yell at the other one, like, okay, share your toys with your
Right.
sister, right?
Right.
So a lot of it is really about like teaching these children problem solving skills, because that is going to stay with them. That's a skill that they can take with them as they move through life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Because if they don't learn while they're with you, at some point in their life, in adulthood, they're going to have to learn those lessons or maybe get in trouble, right? And also another thing is listening, right? Because I know, especially with the teenagers, there was a survey in one of the high schools here in Atlanta where they asked teachers the students what they want from their teachers. And I think 90% of the kids said, I wish they could listen or see me. It's like we just speak over
Mm.
them, like they don't feel seen, they don't feel heard. And then there's that identity crisis where am I here? Do I matter? Am I worthy and stuff? And that could also impact mental well-being of kids, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of like a fundamental human need, right? Everyone just wants to be seen, heard, and validated. And so this is okay, this is another actionable tip for people, right? Is to just sit and validate how the person, how your kid is feeling. Like, sometimes they don't know how they're feeling. So just saying to them, like, hey, I know you're feeling sad right now, or you're feeling upset right now, or it seems like something's really bothering you. And that's okay, right? It's okay to sit with those feelings and really listening, like you said. So yes, but really validating and listening to them is powerful. And, in our practice, we work with the adults, right? So we work with the parents. And it's difficult, like we were saying, it's difficult for some parents sometimes to do that without jumping in. So we talk a lot about boundaries and how can you set some healthy emotional boundaries for yourself so that you can have the capacity to do this work, to be able to sit down and to listen and to validate, and also to do that for yourself. Because if you yourself, as the parent or the, supporting adult, is not feeling like you are being heard, supported, and validated, it's very hard to draw from an empty well, right? So that's why it's so important for the caretaker or caregiver to also be taking care of themselves first.
Right, right. What are some strategies to help the caretakers set boundaries? I know that's difficult, especially for moms. I think most moms don't have any boundaries at all. If you have a mom who's just not paying attention to herself, not taking care of herself, this is an adult, right? What strategies, or what was like maybe one or two simple things that they could maybe do to maybe start?
Yeah, such a great question. So I think with boundaries, oftentimes this is what I see people doing is they expect that boundaries are what other people will do. So I'll tell you, this is my boundary, and I need you to change your behavior in order to respect my boundary. And that is just, a trap, right? It's going to just make you feel more anxious, more frustrated, more unsupported. So boundaries are really how we respond to situations, and it's recognizing what is okay for us and how are we going to change our response to a situation if our boundary is not being respected, right? So it's kind of a subtle difference, but it's a really important one. So I mean, the biggest one is really self-care, right? And so what that means is, and I know this is easier said than done, right? So I always tell this to my patients, like, I know we always talk about this, it's easier said than done, but really prioritizing sleep, making sure you're getting adequate nutrition, making sure that you're getting fresh air, exercise, sunshine, all of those things. It's really the foundation. If extra support is needed, then it's probably worth talking to a therapist, right? Or even like we do integrative psychiatry. So working with someone who can really coach you through all of those different elements, and maybe, getting that extra support is an important boundary, because not only is it going to give you a foundation where you have like a larger well that you can draw from, but it's also modeling those behaviors for your children and for your family.
Right, right. Yes, sleep is definitely important. I've seen a lot of people say, "Oh, but sleep, I can get away with 5 hours of sleep, but I have all these things to do. How do I stop and get the sleep you're telling me to do?"
Yes, and it's such a tough one. And so with that, there are ways to do it, right? And so, letting go of expectations of perfection, and I see this with moms a lot, is like I have to do everything and I have to do it all perfectly. So first of all is letting go of that expectation. And with sleep specifically, sleep fluctuates from night to night. So it's not about every single night you have to get perfect sleep. Of course, it's just not possible. And especially if you have little ones at home, and it's just not possible. But making it a priority. So making it something that you're thinking about and you're working on, and maybe, bringing in supports if you have them. And I know not everybody has access to outside support, but that could mean, you know, having your sibling, if you have like family nearby helping out, or if you have parents nearby, if you have other moms, where you can maybe send your kid for a sleepover, and, like those kinds of things. Because so there's this really interesting book called Hunt, Gather, Parent. I don't know if you've heard of that book, but
Yeah.
so she's this mom in San Francisco, and she just talked about how modern parenting is so isolative, and it's so far removed from the way that people parented traditionally. And, there's that saying that it takes a village, and it truly does. And so I think there's a lot of mom guilt of like drawing upon those supports. Oh,
Yeah.
I should be able to do it all myself. But traditionally speaking, if you look at how people parented, in traditional cultures, it was all about the village and it was all about support. You had aunts and uncles and cousins, and everyone was running around and supporting each other. And so I think a big part of it is letting go of that guilt a little bit of asking for help.
Yeah. Yes, it's okay to ask for help and also modeling it to your kids too. So when they're in trouble, it's okay for them to ask for help. If we act like we are able to do it all, they feel like there's something wrong with them when they can't do it all.
Yes.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Any other tip you'd like to add before we go?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is really coming back to building awareness within oneself, within yourself, right? And so that can come from either, listening to podcasts like yours, or reading books, or talking to friends, talking to family, but really cultivating that awareness. Sometimes working with a therapist can be really helpful. And then truly working on your own self-care. And I know it's like, it's the simplest thing. And I have patients tell me like, Dr. Bhopal, like, I know you always talk about this, and I finally did it, and oh my God, it works. Like who knew? So it sounds so simple, but a lot of times, like the simplest things in life are sometimes the most powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. And if there's someone listening to this podcast and would like to work with you or one of the therapists in your group, where can they find you?
Yeah, so they can go to our website at pacificintegrativepsych.com. And then we also have a YouTube channel if you want to just get a sense of, more of this stuff and how we might approach it. It's at Pacific Integrative Psych.
Thank you.